we back on track. But this time, we're taking a little break from good old computer graphics and MIPS 1 labs. This time, we are configuring Rust's state-of-the-art static analyzer, commonly known as Clippy. So I'm basically changing my Helix editor config. Basically I enabled all of the lint categories through extra arguments to the chat command for Rust Analyzer. At least I think it should work, and then because both pedantic restriction and style seem to be the ones that the Rust devs themselves don't recommend using on a deny or forbid basis, even though I've forbidden them, I am allowing, I'm going through them to see if there's some that I should allow. One of them already being arbitrary source item ordering, because I don't want to have my items sorted alphabetically, and that's the bother, because if I add new structure enums, it's actually reporting, hey, this is not alphabetically sorted, and I'm like, I know, mate, and I possibly don't care. And in fact, the unlint itself states that the cache locality may not be kept if you enable this lint and actually enforce it on your project. So yeah, really now about the borrow interior mutable const. Mentions it checks for a borrow of a known constant with interior mutability. Or is this bad? Line constants are copied at every use site, which means any change to the value will be lost after the newly created value is dropped. Alright. Whatever. I've not coded in Rust in a long time, and I was just feeling like doing something else. So there's that. Checks for box, new default, whichever region has box default. Shouldn't that just apply to anything that implements default? I think it should, but let me check real quick. The standard library, system preference, no, and make that IO or light it is. I'm looking for default, which dare I say should be a tray, right? Yeah. So I'm not really sure what is it that people mention. Why does it make it exclusive to box? Anything that you just call new, where new is either overloaded or exists as a single parameter function, i.e. in this case constructor, should have this lint enabled so that you don't have to call default and just call default if it's implemented on the type. I think that's checkable, right? I think it is, Mr. Right. Actually, what am I doing? I do want to forbid it. So built-in type shadow warns if a generic shadows a built-in type. This gives surprising type errors, which is to say, instead of returning U32, you're returning a type that shadows U32, the built-in type. Nice, I'll leave it forbidden. Byte character slices. Checks for hard to read slices of byte characters that could be more easily expressed as a byte string. Makes a fair amount of sense, and I'm going to leave forbidden. Bytes ends. Checks for the use of byte ends. As byte scale is more efficient. Alright. Case sensitive file extension comparisons. Checks for calls it ends with possible file extensions and suggests to use a case insensitive approach instead. That makes a fair amount of sense. So I'll just leave it forbidden. Cast lossless. My lord, how many are there left? Fuck's sake, mate. Oh my god. Checks for casts between numeric types that can be replaced by safe conversion functions. Rosts, because that's how you spell Rost, right? Pronounce. Oh well, who cares? Rost's ASCII will perform many kinds of conversions, including silently lossy conversions. Conversion functions such as i32 from will only perform lossless conversions. Using the conversion functions prevents conversions from becoming silently lossy. Sure, my man, sure. I'll leave it forbidden. Cast possible truncation. Of course. Of course. Cast possible wrap. Of course. Cast precision loss. Of course. Checks for casts from any numeric type to a float type where the receiving type cannot store all values from the original type without rounding errors. Basically, this warns on casting any integer with 32 or more bits to F32 or any 64-bit integer, just F64. Cast pointer alignment. Checks for casts using as pointer cast from a less strictly aligned pointer to a more strictly aligned pointer. I don't tend to use raw pointers in Rust. Dereferencing the resulting pointer may be undefined behavior. Alright, I suppose. Not much I can say about it, considering I don't use raw pointers. I don't tend to use raw pointers. Cast sign loss. Checks for casts from a signed to an unsigned numeric type. In this case, negative values wrap around to large positive values, which can be quite surprising in practice. Then forbidden it is. Config, not test. This may give the false impression that a code base has 100% coverage, yet actually has untested code. Enabling this also guards against excessive mockery as well, which is an anti-pattern. What exactly is supposed? What is that supposed to mean? Excessive mockery. Whatever. I'm not actually tested, but not including me will falsely increase coverage. Alright. I suppose we do want a fellow TDD. Checks for uses of cars last or cars next back on a string slice to check if it ends with a given character. Why is this bad readability? This can be written more concisely as ends with. Of course. Cars next comparison. Checks for usage of cars next on a string slice to check if it starts with a given character. Alright, so that's parallel to the previous prior. Lint Checks conversions, checks for explicit bounds checking when casting. Of course. How could I possibly not want this enabled? Right? Of course. Clone known ref pointer. Isn't that just a cow? Oh wait, no, a cow is a clone known, right? Similar but not quite the same. I mean, not so really similar at all. Checks for usage of clone and a ref counter pointer, so either RC, atomic RC, RC weak pointer, or synchronous weak pointer. I suggest calling clone via unified function syntax instead. Of course, why would I possibly not want this on my code, right? Of course. Cloned instead of copied. Checks for users in a lot of cloned on an iterator option where copied could be used instead. Copied is better. Copied is better because it guarantees that the type being cloned implements copy. Oh, what a thing. The question thus being, when you clone an iterator and a mutable iterator, it clones the iterator, but it doesn't necessarily clone the type of the underlying data types. I mean the underlying data types of the iterator that the iterator is iterating through. While copied actually ensures the data types that the iterator is iterating through can be copied. I mean the implement copy. Still, what's the point of implementing copy? I mean you can implement clone, right? I don't remember. I've not coded in Rust in multiple months. Compare null. This lint checks for equality comparisons with pointer null. Makes a fair amount of sense. Cognitive complexity. I remember I read a paper when I first configured Clippy on a project, and I stumbled upon this option. Cognitive complexity. We used to think it measured how hard a method is to understand. Ideally, we would like to be able to measure how hard a function is to understand, given its context, what we call its cognitive complexity. But that's not what this lint does. See, known problems. The true cognitive complexity of a method is not something we can calculate using modern technology. This lint has been left in restrictions so as to not mislead users into using this lint as a measurement tool. Excessive nesting and too many lines. I'm just going to leave it on and move on, and if at some point I need it off, then I'll just disable that on a per project basis. Collapsible else if. Alright, makes a fair amount of sense. Collapsible if. Makes a fair amount of sense indeed. Collapsible match. Finds nested match or if flat expressions where the patterns may be collapsed. So you've got a let n match at b, if it's sum, then you go in again with a match, and if it's okay, but you could just go ahead and indeed further fine grain the pattern of OPT from the very start. Yes, makes a very amount of sense. Of course. Alright. Forbidden it is. Comparison chain. How many more are there? Alright, not that many. Not that many. Right? Alright, yeah, not that many. Comparison chain. Checks comparisons chains written with if that can be written with match and compare. Was this bad? If is not guaranteed to be exhaustive and conditionals can get repetitive. of course, comparison to empty. Checks for comparing to an empty slice, such as that or that, and suggest using is empty where applicable. Now, why is this bad? Some structures can answer is empty much faster than checking for equality. So it is good to get into the habit of using is empty and having it is cheap. Besides, it makes the intent clearer than a manual comparison in some contexts. Whatever. Copy iterator. Checks for types that implement copy as well as iterator. Implicit copies can be confusing when working with iterator combinators. So you've got a type there that derives copy and clone, and then you're also implementing iterator for that same type. And apparently, if it's a type that implements both copy and iterator, it just shouldn't. What exactly could it possibly be that I am looking at right here? Implicit copies can be confusing when working with iterator combinators. Oh yeah, now I remember why there was a copy trait and a clone trait. The clone trait makes it that you can clone it, but the copy trait makes it that you can have implicit copies from one type to another instead of automatic move semantics when you just assign one thing to the other. In the general sense, of course, there's more ability patterns involved there, but that's the overall outlook. Yeah, I'm not sure if I should disable this one because I'm pretty confident we just went through another one that actually mentioned using copied instead of cloned when you were using an iterator, and if you actually supporting that, then there's no point in enabling this as well, because this would straight up not even allow having something that implements copy and iterator. But I'm not sure if I should disable it because, I mean, why is this bad? The argument seems reasonable, but I'm not even understanding it fully. Implicit copies can be confusing when working with iterator combinators. Yes. I'm not sure. I'm not coded in Rust in a long time, and I generally don't know. Implicit copies can be confusing when working with iterator combinators. I'm just going to disable it. So, copy iterator. Actually, I'm not going to disable it. Let's leave it on. I'll just use and expect if at some point I need to allow the lint to not enforce it. I mean, if I want to not enforce the lint, avoid enforcing the lint. Checks usage of std file system create directory and suggests using create directory all. So sometimes the former is mistakenly chosen over the latter, resulting in failure when more than one directory needs to be created or when the directory already exists. Crates which never need to specifically create a single directory may wish to prevent this mistake. Alright. dbg macro checks for usage of the dbg macro. The dbg macro is intended as debugging tool should not be present in released software or committed to a version control system. Alright, mate. What can I say, mister? What can I say? Decimal little representation was if there's a better representation for a numeric literal. Especially for big powers of 2, a hexadecimal representation is usually more readable than a decimal representation. Why don't you just use... Oh, wait. There's bit shifting here, but does it work the same way it does in C++? I forgot. You may as well just bit shift 116 times or something like that, or 32 times if you want 4 billion. I mean, pretty obvious, but sure. Moving on. Whatever. Default instead of I to empty. It checks for std either empty default and suggests replacing it with std either empty. Either empty is the more idiomatic way. Alright, can't say I care much and definitely can debate that. Not when it comes to rustations, idiomatic ways. Default numeric fallback checks for usage of unconstrained numeric literals, which may cause default numeric fallback in type inference, which is to say, explicitly including the type as part of the literal when handling numeric literals, right? All right. This lint is implemented using a custom algorithm independent of rustc's inference, which results in many false positive and false negatives. That's unfortunate. Default trait access checks for literal calls to default. It's easier for the reader if the name of the type is used rather than the generic default. Alright. Default union representation displays a warning when a union is declared with a default representation. That is, without a representation C. Yeah, I don't think you should even use unions without that unless you, of course, really in need for them. Alright. Sure. Alright. There are no guarantees about the offset of the fields for unions with multiple non-zero sized types fields without an explicitly specified layout. These cases may lead to undefined behavior in unsafe blocks, which, let's be honest, you probably are best off not touching unsafely. If you do, then well, you know what you're doing, basically. Checks for slicing expressions which are equivalent to dereferencing the value. So instead of taking a vector, instead of taking a reference, an immutable reference to the whole range of a vector, you may as well just dereference the vector and create a new immutable reference to those values the vector has. I mean, is it Rust? Are vectors also resource handles in Rust? If they do, then it does make sense to say that you're getting an immutable reference to the underlying data the vector is managing. I'd say it's fair to say that either way. Disallowed macros denies the configured macros in clippy.toml. Alright, and I'm going to disable that one. So this is going to be disallowed because I'm not going to configure clippy.toml. Right, there we go. Next, disallowed methods. Oh, fuck me. Moving on. Oh, fuck me. How many disallowed are there? Fuck's sake. Disallowed names. I don't care. Why would you disallow foo and baz? What if you're doing competitive programming in Rust? Well, if you're doing competitive programming, you probably are not using a linter. You just want things to work, right? That's what I thought. And I mean, that's what I didn't know before I started off reading competitive programming books. Disallowed script identifiers. Yes, this one I want to allow. This one I want to enforce. My code does not use Unicode. I'm barely going to allow it in. I barely allow it in. Yes, no ASCII ident should actually be what I need. Either way, I'll just leave both on. That's it. Disallowed types. Fuck me again. Oh lord. Doc broken link. Yeah, I think all of these docs I'm going to leave on. Checks the doc comments haven't broken links, which is indeed really nice. And I'm going to leave on. Doc comment double space line breaks. Ew, that's disgusting. Just make it explicit, for fuck's sake. Yes, I'm going to continue forbidding it. Doc include without config. Checks if included files in doc comments are included only for config doc. So instead of using the global attribute doc include strings and file, instead use the global attribute config attribute doc, and for doc include strings and file. While restrictors, these files are not useful for compilation but will still be included. Also, if any of these non-source code file is updated, it will trigger recompilation. Oh, that's nice to know. I like it. Known problems. Excluding this will currently result in the file being left out if the item's docs are inline from another crate. This may be fixed in a future version of Frostdoc. Alright. I'm going to ignore that one, and yeah. Doc lazy continuation. In Common Markdown, the language used to write doc comments, a paragraph nested within a list or block quote, does not need any line after the first one to be indented or marked. The spec calls this a lazy paragraph continuation. It's easy to write but hard to read. So, alright, I get it. I understand. This thing was probably intended to have 2 rows, but it does not. It has 0 rows and has followed by a block quote. Fix it by escaping the marker. This example is actually intended to be a list. Fix it by indenting the list contents. So yes, I'm going to leave it on. I'm going to leave it forbidden. Forbidden, the forbidden gems. The ones I've got down there. Just kidding. Detects the syntax foo in documentation comments. Notice quotes instead of backticks outside of code blocks. Is likely a typo when defining an intra-doc link. Doc link with quotes. Detects the syntax foo in documentation comments. Notice quotes instead of backticks outside of code blocks. It's likely a typo when defining an intro. Oh, right, yeah. So instead of using single backticks, you're using. Alright, I'm going to leave it on. Doc markdown checks for the presence of underscore, scope operator, or camel case words outside ticks in documentation. You sure about that? Oh, yeah, of course. Because if you do it outside of documentation, outside of code blocks, so yeah, outside of ticks, it triggers the markdown. Italics, and I don't know about the scope operator. Rustdoc supports markdown formatting, that is, and camel case probably indicates some code which should be included between ticks. That can also, underscore can also be used as for emphases. This link tries to consider that. Yeah, I'm not sure if it was an italics or emphasis. I know for sure typist uses underscore for italics, and yeah. So I think Martin had like underscore for emphases, and then double underscore for italics. So I suppose alternative emphases. However, known problems. Lots of bad docs won't be fixed. What the lint checks is limited, and there are still false positives. HTML elements and the content are not limited. In addition, running documentation comments, including the brackets inside a link text, would trip the parser. Therefore, documenting link with, open bracket, small vac, inline capacity, and then small vac. What? Would fail. Whatever. Link text with brackets should be written as following. Consume the array and return the inner. Whatever. Doc over indented list items. Yeah, I'm gonna leave it on. Double must use. Checks for a must use attribute without further information on functions method that return a type already marked as must use. The attribute isn't needed. Not using it, the result will already be reported. Alternatively, one can add some text to the attribute to improve the link message. That I like and I'm going to enforce. So moving on, duplicate underscore argument. Checks for function arguments having similar names differing by an underscore. It affects code readability. So instead of having a and underscore a, which to be honest, I don't know what type of genius thought that was a good idea, but I suppose somebody did it. That's why we need limits for this. Alright. I mean, hey, who knows? Maybe they're doing some sort of interface that from which they don't control the parameters, and it's something that's got to do with FFI or something. I don't know. Lots of possibilities. May not seem as idiotic as I'm making it out to be, or at least as it first may seem to be. Elidable lifetime names. Checks for lifetime annotations which can be replaced with anonymous lifetimes. Alright, yeah, that's fair. No point having a lifetime there if everything is pretty much got the same lifetime. We're enforcing it, alright. No problems. This lint ignores functions with where clauses that reference lifetimes to prevent false positives. What did we use? Where clauses and functions? I think it was to enforce type traits, right? You could either have those traits enforced within the like a generic declaration right after the function identifier or name, or you could have the where after the return type to specify traits for the already declared generic types, right? I'm hoping that was the case, but I'm not quite sure. I remember it's been multiple months since I last coded in Rust. 4 months, basically. Checks for usage of if expressions with an else if branch, but without a final else branch. So, what you're saying is, alright, I mean, Miss Rossi sure knows more their way around code than I do, right? Of course, still. Why do I think Miss Rossi is like, whatever. Yeah, embedded systems. Empty drop. What is this? Text for empty drop implementation logic. Why would you possibly want to do that? Empty drop implementation have no effect when dropping an instance of a type. They are most likely useless. However, an empty drop implementation prevents a type from being destructured, which might be the intention being behind adding the implementation as a marker. Yeah, well, I suppose, yes. Not exactly the type of thing that I do on most projects, so I'll just leave it on in disable in my fine grained basis if I ever require to. Empty enum, text for enums with no invariants, which therefore uninhabited types cannot be instantiated. Makes sense. The never type is still a nightly only experimental API, and therefore the lint is only triggered if feature never type is enabled. Oh yeah, I remember. At some point I read that you had the exclamation mark, the primitive type never, and they were working, but it was still, it was more of a long running thing, that long term thing that they had to implement an actual never type, but apparently they still haven't. If you only want a type which can be instantiated, you should use the primitive type never, because that has more extensive compiler support and implementations of common traits. As of this writing, the never type is still the only experimental API. Therefore, the lint is only triggered if feature never type is enabled, which, whatever, who cares. type cannot exist, use that type directly, or define a new type which is distinct, which is to say just use a struct, make it a public intake. Yeah, the new type patterned. Alright, whatever. I do want to look that up in the stdrs though. So I think it was any? No. I'm not sure if it was any, but why not? It wasn't any. Of course it wasn't any. Primitive type never. The that type is also called never. Alright. Consider the from str trait. When implementing this trait for string, we need to pick a type for and since converting a string into a string will never result in an error, the appropriate type is nothing. Currently, the type used is an enum with no variance, though this is only because that was added to Rust at a later date, and it may change in the future. Within an type of never, if we have to call string from str, for some reason the result will be a result string never, which we can unpack like this. So just okay, and that's it. Since the variant contains a never type, it can never occur. This means we can exhaustively match on result by just taking the OK variant. This illustrates another behavior of never. It can be used to delete certain enum variants from generic types like result. That's good. I like it. I like it a lot. Alright. That is a very good thing to know. Nice pattern you got going there, Rust devs. Empty enum variants with brackets finds enum variants without fields that are declared with empty brackets. So why restrict this? Empty brackets after an enum variant declaration are redundant and can be omitted, and it may be desirable to do so consistently for style. However, removing the brackets also introduces a public constant name after the variant. So this is not just a syntax simplification by an API change, and adding them back is a breaking API change. I mean, alright, whatever. Can't say I care much about breaking APIs. Unless of course I'm in the job and I'm probably not going to work with whatever length I want in the job. Empty structs with brackets. Finds structs without fields and a so-called empty struct that are declared with brackets. Whatever. Who cares? Same as before. Enum glob use. Checks for use enum my lord. It usually better start to use the prefix name of an enumeration variant rather than importing variants. Indeed. Known problems. Old style enumeration the prefix the variants are all still around. I mean, why would you possibly care about old style enumerations, my friend? Just update your code base, and if you can, then fuck off. Right? Yeah, wish that were the case. Unfortunately, it isn't. Detect enumerations variants. Enumeration variants are prefixed or suffixed by the same characters. Which is to say, if it's got a prefix that is the enum identifier itself, the variant has, yeah. Well, yeah, I remember this actually was very useful sometimes on some of my projects. So yeah, I'm gonna leave it on. Oh, expect. My lord, how many left? Right, not that many, right? My lord, that's a lot of lints right there. My god, yep, that's a lot of lints. Oh well, who cares? Expect. Checks for expect calls on the result type. Expect can be called directly to avoid extra type inversion from Makes a fair amount of sense. I'm going to go on. Error, implementation error. Checks for types named error that implement error. Why restrict this? It can become confusing when a code base has 20 types, all named error, requiring either aliasing them in the use statement or qualifying them like my module error. This hinders comprehension as it requires you to memorize every variation of importing error used across a code base. Instead, just name the error with, prefix error with something else, or suffix it with something else. It's not that hard, mate. Excessive precision. Text for float literals with a precision greater than that supported by the underlying type. The lint is suppressed for literals with over const literal digits threshold digits. So the configuration parameter. Rost would truncate the literal silently. Yes, yes. That is absolutely correct. I like the fact that this exists. Exhaustive enums. Warns on any exported enums that are not typed non-exhaustive. Why restrict this? Making an enum exhaustive is a stability commitment. Adding a variant is a breaking change. The project may wish to ensure that they are not exhaustive enums, or that every exhaustive enum is explicitly allowed. Yeah, makes a fair amount of sense. Yes, okay. Yeah. You probably want to do that. Exhaustive structs. Yeah, also want to do that, probably. Exit. Detect calls to exit that are not in the main function. Calls to exit immediately terminate the program. There's no means to this being that means to troubleshoot a problem and maybe an unexpected side effect. Code bases may use this link to require that all exits are performed either by panicking, or by calling exit from main, which is a single place to look at, in case you don't know where is it that you exited. Alright, I want to enable it. Expect used, check for expect or expect call the results and expect calls and options. Alright, yeah, I like it. We over expect will let the thread panic on values. Normally, you want to implement more sophisticated error handling and propagate errors upwards with operator. Alright, sure. Makes a very much sense. Explicit implementation, clone and copy. Check for explicit clone implementation for copy types. To avoid surprising behavior, these traits should agree and the behavior of copy cannot be overridden. In almost all situations, a copy type should have a clone implementation that does nothing more than copy the object, which is what derived copy clone gets you. Fair. Explicit deref methods. Checks for explicit deref or deref mute method calls. Alright. Dereferencing with a dereferencing operator is clearer and more concise when not part of a method chain. Alright. Unless of course it's a method chain. Alright, yeah, fair. Explicit into iter loop. Checks for loops while into iter will do. Alright, yeah, I like it. Explicit iter loops. Alright, yeah, sure, whatever. What's this? Whether to recommend using implicit into iter for reborrowed values. Oh yeah, so like you dereference rmvec and you borrow it again. Then you dereference there rmvec and you borrow it again as a mutable reference. Alright, sure, whatever. Still, I think it's I like this configuration parameter, but I'm not sure if I want to have some form of global clippy dat toml. And it's not if you can configure it anywhere but in the configuration file, which is really unfortunate. Because everywhere I was like, where is it I'm supposed to configure this? Nowhere. What a thing. Who would have thought? Probably also want to disable nursery. deprecate it, of course. Yeah. Problem here being, what a thing. Right, so I'm basically going to have to set the cargo manifester as an environment variable that is only applicable to the LSP in my Helix config, and I think I can do that. And then also, well, of course, creating the clippy.toml file. Oh well, whatever. Who cares? I'm just gonna go here. I'm gonna go here. A second. It's gonna be config. And I'm gonna make it here. I'm just gonna make it here and go. Actually, I'm just gonna make it in my home file direction. Fuck this shit. So clippy tomo, or just clippy. So in my home directory, it's going to be a hidden file, so dot file clippy.toml. And right here, what exactly could you possibly mean by this document has been excluded? Oh, whatever, my friend. Yes, here's where I wanted to configure this. So enforce actor loop reborrow is going to be true because I like that and I want that. Now I'm going to have to go here. I'll have to go into my docs healer editor code and go into languages, and I think in language config there was something to set the environment variables for the language server, right? Because I'm not wrong, right? Apparently I'm wrong. Yes, apparently I'm wrong, my lord. Or not. Environment, there it is. Right, so this is so basically it's gonna have to be right here. I'm gonna have to go language server, Rust analyzer. I mean not config, but whatever. Environment is gonna be what is it gonna be? It's gonna be one of these. It's gonna be a structure. What in the actual fuck have I just done? There we go. Yes. Yes. Right, so basically it's going to be, I'm going to set it right there. Any environment variables that will be used when starting the language server. Still, are those environment variables like kept throughout the execution of any commands by the... No, it says when starting the language server, which is to say it could very well not be that it uses them across execution, which is to say I'm going to have to set it within my, yeah, whatever. Who cares? Enforce idle reborrow. Well, I'm just gonna go ahead and call it data. Yeah. Clippy. So it's gonna be config fish, config.fish. Not touched this in quite some time. Set gx. This is gonna be it's gonna be clippy conf dir, and it's gonna be I'm gonna go users debug clippy.toml. Oh wait, no. Directory specified. No. Alright, no. I just want to specify that directory. So semlins can be configured, which is spec search for in the directory specified by clippy confdir. So yeah, clippy confdir has been set to that. Maybe it's not a great idea to do that. Whatever. Let's just leave it there. Who cares? Who cares indeed? Now, I'd like to know how come they... Does it mean it searches it on a like what? Who cares? Who cares? Well, it's done. Yeah, I'm just gonna close this buffer, and move on to the next one. Alright. This has been set, and this has been set, and this whatever, and we can continue. So, field reassign with default. Checks for immediate reassignment of fields. Now that I think about it, maybe it's a bad idea to not do that, just in case. Let's make it config. Yes, I think that's a better idea. And yeah. And now I don't have that one open. Right, so I'm gonna move. So Clippy, I'm gonna move it into config. There we go. LSD. I mean, yeah, whatever. And I don't know. S fuck me, mate. LA. There we go. That's what I like to see. Alright, moving on. Field reassigned with default. Checks for immediate reassignment of fields initialized with default. Makes sense. Makes a fair amount of sense that you want to do that. So yeah, I'm gonna leave it on. Field scoped visibility modifiers. So this is gonna be now that I think about it, checks for usage of scoped visibility modifiers like pop crate on fields. Instead of making it pop crate or pop super, just make it pub or not make it pub, but don't make it, and make functions that actually return, that actually, all right. I mean, sure, sort of. Sometimes you really just want to access the fields. So yes, I suppose. A bit annoying until you're used to it, but fairly useful. Scope visibility modifiers cause a field to be accessible within some scope between public and private, potentially within an entire crate. This allows for fields to be non-private while upholding internal invariance, but can be a code smell. Scoped visibility requires checking a greater area, potentially an entire crate, to verify that an invariant is upheld. And global analysis requires a lot of effort. Yeah, I agree. Fair enough. File type is file. When people are testing a file type with file type is file, they are testing whether a path is something they can get bytes from. But is file doesn't cover special file types in Unix-like systems and doesn't cover symlink in Windows. Using is not a directory is a better way. Yeah, I remember this one. This one actually was very useful to me while building the project. Yeah, I'm gonna leave it on. So filter map bool then. Checks for usage of bool then in iterator filter map. This can be written with filter, then map instead, which would reduce nesting and separates the filtering from the transformation phase.
Te he traído la cerveza de Amstel, ¿quieres poner ahí? He traído Amstel también. Eso sí me está gustando, ¿verdad? Y los cogí. Ahora estoy sensual. ¿La quieres poner en la nevera? ¿La quieres poner? Adam, cariño, Adam, mira, eso yo no puedo aguantar ya, ¿eh? Yo no puedo. Llevo 2 horas sin verte beber agua. 2 horas. Yo no puedo, déjale. Sí, Adam, no está pasando nada, ¿no? Da igual, no da igual, no. Y toda la mañana bebiendo agua. Adam, bebe agua. Hombre. subir y bajar.
comer? Bizarrap, ¿quieres comer?
Ay.
Te pareces bizarrap.